Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's 6 o'clock and I don't often get to start things on time. And so we're going to start tonight on time, at least start the first one off on time. Can't promise that'll always happen, but we appreciate each and every one of you being here this evening for the first of our series of Forage colleges. But tonight, our guest speaker will be Dr. Brian Arnall. He is the Precision Nutrient Management Specialist there on campus at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater. And he is going to be talking a lot this evening about fertility, soil fertility. Some of it's going to be mainly directed toward cool season forages, because right now that seems to be what we're dealing with. And the main goal of these topics when we begin to set this class up was to try to select topics and try to present them at a time when they're going to be the most applicable to you, and hopefully before they are scheduled to be needing to be done, so that you can have the time to prepare and be ready to implement these changes as it comes that time. And so hopefully we have done a good job of lining this out for you. So without anything further, we're going to turn the floor over to Dr. Arnall. If you have questions, just for the sake of as many people as we have, if you will try to type those questions in the chat, we'll get those relayed to Dr. Arnall, and he can answer those as they come about and when he has an opportunity. But if you will, we'll kind of keep an eye on that chat. If you have questions, if you'll type them in there, we will get them to you and get an answer. So Dr. Arnall, thanks for being with us this evening, and we'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, Justin, I appreciate the opportunity to come do this. It's Zoom is a pain. I hate it, but it does let me get out to areas that I don't get to often. And so this is reaching a crowd that I love Eastern Oklahoma and Southern Oklahoma, but I don't get to see you all that much. So it gives me an opportunity to at least visit with some of y'all and maybe hear some of your problems and visit. And please feel free, like Justin said, put anything in the text box or the chat box that you may have. I've got that up too, so I can see. Also, and I don't want to get into any of the problems that these guys have recording, but it's helpful. I like seeing where everybody's from. So I've already had some type in. I see a pretty healthy dose of Southern Oklahoma. I see us floating up into Haskell County with McCurtain. If there's anybody from Northeast, it kind of gives me an idea of what territory and what kind of soils that I'm addressing. I did see Tracy Beatty's on, so we got a little bit floating west there. So with that, I'll kind of move into my discussion, and happy to see, like I said, any questions that come along the way. Let me get in here. There we go. First things first, I want to point up or pull up some references that I use on a regular basis, and I have for a long time. It's the Oklahoma Soil Fertility Handbook and the Oklahoma Forage and Pasture Forage Fertility Guide. These are available as PDFs. Go to your county educator office, ask them for a PDF. They're available online. I've got a few thousand of these sitting in Stillwater, and I'm more than happy to send a couple dozen down to any county office and share them out. So if you'd like a hard copy of any of these, have at it. The Soil Fertility Handbook is kind of a big book. It's actually what I used to teach out of for my soil fertility class. The Forage Guide is something that I actually worked up with Darren Redfern before he left, and his guys like Brian Pugh and JJ is on it, and Travis Hanks. Bunch of that crowd help write it. It's set up more like a book of fact sheets. So every chapter is a 1 to 2 pager. It talks about pH, NPK, those things, and then it goes into a single fertility rec for every species that we were looking at that time. So you could see annual brome or fescue or Bermuda grass, and so it's broken up to be a single print. Or happy to send some glossy magazines, because we printed up quite a few of both of those. So like I said, get a hold of your county educator, let them know that you would like a hard copy, and they'll holler at me, and we'll get some in the mail. More than happy to. With that, kind of moving on, and I'm also going to say, and I want to open it with questions. So I don't want necessarily to answer them now, but as we go, this is a topic. I don't do a lot of forage fertility talks. This is a topic that I want to answer the questions you have. And so, not getting out, and I haven't been able to get out and visit with people, and I don't get to talk to educators like I normally do. I don't know of all the questions y'all may have. So please, at any point there's a question that pops up or something that you want answered in this discussion, hit that chat box and put it in there, and we'll do our best to cover it at somewhere or the other, the best of my possibility. Keeping track of time here. All right, moving on. Soil sampling, folks. I know, and it's something the extension office does often, and here's it often. The soil sampling, I beg folks, it's $10 for a routine sample. It is the highest ROI in forage management that you can have. That's return on investment for $10. Look at it this way: if you're planning to fertilize, you're planning to go buy fertilizer, you're about to cut a check. I don't care if you're fertilizing 30 acres or 300 acres. It's about to be a healthy little check if you're going to fertilize something well. And so to get that check cut right and be as efficiently as possible, ooh, that's a good one, Justin. We'll touch on that one. You got to have that soil test, folks. I mean, think of it this way. So I'll put it this way: you're planning to go out and you use just a base rec, and you're going to put out 100 pounds of nitrogen, 30 pounds of phosphorus, and 40 pounds of potassium. Why? I don't know, because it sounded like good numbers. You find that soil sample, and you take that soil sample, and you find out you only need 20 instead of 30 pounds of phosphorus. That's 10 pounds of phosphorus per acre you're cutting. That's going to run you 30 to 50 cents a pound. So right there, you immediately start talking about $5 an acre. So even if you're only doing a 2-acre patch, you've just paid for that soil sample. Now, if you aren't planning to fertilize and you're just kind of looking at the health and the capabilities of your system, that soil sample is going to give you a really good idea of where your system is at. Do you need to add some? Would a application of phosphorus potassium give you any return? Maybe you're on a piece of ground that's been getting litter for many years. I grew up in Northeast Oklahoma, and there's some Bermuda grass patches up there that probably don't need fertilized for another decade or 20 because they had litter and litter and litter. Good to know that, especially if you got a new place you just bought or lease. And so that soil sample, and I know I'm begging you, but it takes a few minutes. I know it's kind of a hassle to get the sample and get it in the office. But folks, there's very few things you can do in forage management and land management that are as cost effective and have a higher return on investment as soil sampling. And that's going to be my soapbox for the night. And I won't return to it that much, but it's just that. So please consider it. It's the best for you. It's the best for your operation. That's the best for the environment if we want to look at sustainability there. All right, so let's start talking about nutrients, and I want to focus on our cool seasons. And please, if you have questions about Bermuda grass or any of our warm seasons, but hey, just let me know. I can address that. But we get in, and I'll address nitrogen later, but our cool seasons and our fertility management, the things we look at are nitrogen, phosphorus, and pH, and potassium. And I want to lead into potassium's been one of those hidden things that we haven't addressed as much, and I think we're kind of missing out on something. So phosphorus, you take that soil sample, you send it into the soil testing lab, and you get a recommend index value from 0 to 65, or actually 0 to, I've seen a lot higher than 65. You can find your county over here. This is what the average samples that were sent into the soil testing lab from 2014 to 2017 were. So you jump over and look at the southeast portion of the state, and our phosphorus levels are some of the lowest in the entire state. So we start talking about, let's just pull LaFleur County. LaFleur County sitting at a 35 on average. That means the average field sent in was 35. And you'd come over here to this value and say, okay, 35 sits into here. My field is going to be 90% sufficient. Means I need about 20 pounds, 25 pounds of phosphorus, and it's going to increase my yield by about 10%. If we go to something lower, if you pull that soil sample and the soil sample comes back at a 20, and I promise you there's some folks on here that have at least seen some fields that have a 20. that 20 is only going to make 70% if you don't do anything with it. So that 70% is saying maybe you got enough nitrogen, phosphorus, and water to grow 2 tons of whatever you want to grow. If you don't put phosphorus on, you're only going to grow 70% of that. So you're only going to grow 1.4 tons instead of 2 tons. If you add 40 pounds, now you're going to increase that up, and that the potential of that field is going to be completed. So it's going to bring it back up. I know I've seen some stuff, especially on the Red River down along here, where we have single digits, 3, 4, 5 parts per million or index. And that means we're at a sufficiency below 50%. That means even if the soil, the water, and everything around you could grow 5-ton forage, you're not going to put up any more than 2.5 ton because you're limited by the phosphorus availability in that soil. And you need to apply that phosphorus in the form of P2O5, and this is a recommendation to get there. I like to tell everybody, take a look at the sufficiency. This is basically how you decide you want to spend money. To be honest, if I'm out somewhere where I'm looking at some prairie grass or something that's just not a productive piece of ground, and I'm sitting above 40, index of 40, meaning I'm above 95%, I'm not going to spend money to put on phosphorus, because a 5% return on 5% increase in yield isn't going to make my money back, and I'm not going to worry about it. So I'm just going to do with what I got. If I'm at 50% sufficiency, again, that's this column. If I'm at 50% sufficiency, I want to start thinking about it. So again, this gives you a region. This is just the average values that are sent into the soil testing lab. It's at medium value. And I'll tell you, the fields, I can take you to some in LaFleur County that I've been on that are going to be in the singles, and some that are well above 70. So it all depends. And that's why a soil test is important to know where you're sitting at. Moving to potassium. Now, potassium is not one we hardly think about in Oklahoma, primarily because we've got a lot of potassium in our soils, especially if you look west. Our western soils have high K. Max we need is 250, but most of our soils are well above that until you get into southeast Oklahoma. That's where we have more rainfall. We've had more leaching and more losses of potassium, and so we tend to have less. Plus, it's a heavy dominant in forage production. Forages remove potassium because it's in that cellular component. It's high K, so if you graze or you pull forage off, you're going to have lower K values. Now, there's not a lot of K-Rex. You don't see a whole lot of heavy K-Rex in things like fescue and such, but it is important. In fact, we're finding it's even more important than we thought, especially in something like Bermuda grass, where we're finding that increasing the K amount, because it's such a heavy user of potassium, is getting us a nice little yield bump. So I would say if your potassium is anywhere at 200 or below, you really should think about getting on some K. We're talking about something that uses a lot of potassium. It helps with your crop, and it's going to get things going. It will also help winter survival. So this winter is going to be hard on a lot of our perennials out there in certain areas. And so having good fertility under them going into this winter would have been significantly important. If I'm looking at an alfalfa production system, I got to make sure I've got good potassium to make it through that winter, because it's extremely important. So K, while we don't think of it too much, is one of those missing things that we may not get in all the time, and we need to keep an eye on it. And the only way we know is with a good soil test to tell us where we're sitting at. Soil pH. Now, we want for our forages to be 5.5 to about a 6 something. But a lot of literature out there will tell you that fescue and some of our other forages are pretty good at dealing with acidity, kind of like winter wheat. Winter wheat will take acidity fairly well, meaning we can get into the mid to low 5s. So we can get away with some lower pHs without losing too much yield, but it's something we got to keep an eye on. The lower the pH goes, we lose the efficiency of the phosphorus. The roots start getting stunted. There's actually, what happens when the pH goes low is aluminum is released in the soil system. And that aluminum is toxic. And so the roots are stunted, meaning if you've got a 5.4 or a 5.5, you may not see a reduction in yield every year. But if it's a dry year, you're going to see a significant reduction because you don't have the roots out there capable of pulling in, or that you need to pull in moisture. So it really comes into a good pH is a healthy crop. It's a bit more nutritious crop often, and also often brings in better fertility if we look at the others. And we'll talk here in a little bit about ag lime versus pale lime versus other things. And I'll get in. Don't let me forget about Greg's question about Red River, because that's a good one. We've got some work on that too. This nitrogen. So now we're going to touch on nitrogen. This is the nitrogen for our cool seasons. So I'm talking the fescues and some of our wheats. You know, those things that are growing in the spring that are about to start getting green up, and they lay off in the summer and get hot. They go through a double cycle. So most of our forages, we're going to tell you need about 50 to 60 pounds of acre per ton you want to produce above that background. And that native background is going to be about a ton, depending on anywhere between 3/4 ton, ton and a half where you're at. And so if you want to produce more, you got to put on that rate. Now, with something like a fescue, we expect most of the time that you're in a 75-25 to 70-30 ratio of spring production to fall production, meaning the majority of your growth is going to be that March, April, May, in sliding into June timeframe is where you're going to get about 70 to 75% of your production out of something like a fescue. And then your fall growth is about 25 to 20%, meaning you get a little bump in that fall, we get that green up, we get a little bit of growth, and we can have some benefit. When we start looking at fertilizing for our winter, our cool seasons like this, we want to make sure that there's that growth right here supported, that spring growth is supported. Now we can do it with a shot in the fall. The tradition has always been, let's just put on 65 pounds, 65 pounds in the fall. Let us get one ton in, and it'll be good for the spring. And folks, that's not bad if you're looking for boosting your yield by about 1 ton. It works great when it doesn't rain in the fall or the winter. And I want to ask you, how dry have you all been in the last 4 or 5 years in Southeast Oklahoma? It's not. And so you got to look at it in this way, is that a fall application of nitrogen will be good for the fall, and it will still be there in the spring if you don't get a lot of rain from October through March. So anytime you can expect a lot of rain, if you put it on in the fall, just discount it and say that you're starting from near scratch. Because that nitrogen has been lost. So what I really want to look at, especially in a production system, is I want a shot in that spring. I want to be going out, early March, February, late February, early March, and I know we're already there with snowfall, and I want to be putting on enough nitrogen, what I think is going to be my spring production. Now, depending on where you're on the ground, that might be 2 to 5 tons. So for every ton of forage production, you want about 50 to 60 pounds. So if I want 2 tons of production, I want 120 pounds put on in that spring, and then carry it through and take a look at that fall. Now, maybe your summer goes through and your spring didn't produce, it wasn't that good of a producer, then you can just let that fall carry off. But if you had a really good spring, you put up a really good hay or had really good pasture in the spring, you're going to have to look at coming in that fall and bumping it with another shot. Maybe it's 30 pounds, maybe it's 60 pounds to get a little bit of that boost fall production. That time frame of that fall application ought to be about the 1st of September, getting a shot of nitrogen out there. And so that's starting to take off and carry through. And hopefully you get it good in and you get a little boost and you get that 20 to 25% of fall production out of your winter annuals or your cool seasons. Now, if I'm talking warm season, most of my warm season nitrogen, if I'm talking Bermuda grass or any of our warm seasons, I'm really getting in there, or even crabgrass. I'm shooting closer to April and May is when I'm looking. I want it to be on there right at or before you start getting really good green nodes and you get that green up, so that it's in the system and you get some good rainfall before you start going dry. So you time that a little bit after you would be doing your cool seasons. About when they're peaking out is about when I would be wanting to be hitting my my summer my warm season grasses, but it's about the same. Some of the keys. So I already mentioned this briefly a little bit, but some of our keys are historically that 60 pounds in the fall or less. We don't want anybody going out with more than 90 pounds, really. For one thing, if you put 90 pounds on for that fall growth, fall's not when we get that growth. So that 90, if you go over 90, you're not going to utilize it in the fall. And your hope is that you hold on to it until the spring. Like I said, it only takes a couple good heavy rains, good soaking rains to lose that through leaching or other aspects. Because that nitrogen, you put it on, folks, that nitrogen is going to be mobile. It's not going to stay in the soil if it gets wet. It's going to leach out. In the spring, that's really when you want to hit on the nitrogen. Depending on your region and your yield goal, you want 60 pounds per ton. On P and K timing, so there's a little bit of back and forth on P and K timing, and the research can be deemed as a little bit back and forth. I look at it this way: what are you looking at, and when can you get on it? When did you soil sample? If you're soil sampling right now, then right now is the time. Potassium. If we look at potassium, what it does, potassium really helps in winter survival. So that means making sure that you have it on if you want to make sure that you have good stand survival through the winter and you want a quick green up. Then I want it on in the fall, or at least looking at getting some on in the fall. Phosphorus, which aids in root growth, I really want to make sure the phosphorus is on going into the spring because it's going to reach out that root. When the plant starts growing again, you're going to have root exploration. That plant's going to start taking off. And if you have good phosphorus supply at that point in time, I want it there. I want to make sure that root goes. So if I balance the two and I add in the potassium is critical in mitigating stress. So potassium controls the stomatum, which means that thing that opens and closes when it gets hot and dry and lets moisture in and out of the plant. Potassium is critical for stomatal control, so it's important for drought. So for me, it's more important to get it on for that spring to take it through that summer, so we have a little bit more drought mitigation, and that phosphorus is on there. So before green up, so I'm talking right now through that early March, so that phosphorus is there, and when that plant starts taking off and greening up, it has the capability to rock and roll and really get a good foot in the ground. It'd be the same for our summer grasses to our warm season grasses. I want them on P and K on there before you get green up. It doesn't have to be long before green up, folks. You need one rainfall. When you put on potassium, potassium is potassium chloride, KO60. As soon as it rains, it's going to go into that soil system and be plant available. So you don't have to worry about, as long as you get a good incorporating rainfall, it's going to be available. Same thing with phosphorus. You put phosphorus on today, phosphorus gets rained in, it gets melted, that phosphorus moves with that rainfall. It's actually going to move about 1/2 inch to 3 inches, depending on your soil type and your rainfall. And it's no more available than the first day after rain. There's some I've come across some stigmas out there that if you put on phosphorus today, it's not available for several months. That's wrong. You put on phosphorus today and it starts becoming unavailable over time because of the things that are acting on it. So you want phosphorus there in the spring. That's kind of why I like my spring applications of my P and K. A side aspect of phosphorus is that phosphorus need is typically greater in acidic soils because it mitigates and it not only mitigates the aluminum toxicity, it ties up the aluminum. So when you have free aluminum in the soil from a low pH, that phosphorus is bound by it, making it unavailable to the plants, but also makes the aluminum unavailable to the plants. So you have this double win. And when I get into pH a little bit more, I'll kind of dig a little bit deeper into that. Is a chloride and KCl? Scott, that's a really good question. Is it something to worry about? Actually, no, it's a wonderful benefit. Our plant's chloride is a plant essential nutrient. And so we actually see chloride deficiencies when people stop fertilizing with potassium. And so it's actually a very good thing. Now, it is a salt. Potassium chloride is no different than sodium chloride, your table salt. So you do have a salt, but the amount of salt delivered in potassium chloride when adding to the soil is much like throwing a packet to the ocean, because our soils are made of salts anyways. And so unless you dumped a bag on a spot, you're going to be okay. Don't do that. Don't put a bag on a single spot. You'll salt it out. But spreading 50 to 100 pounds over an acre, and then that's basically putting 50 to 100 pounds of potash over an acre, which is going to be about 2 million pounds of soil. So the dilution factor is really good. So great question. Chloride is actually a very important aspect that's beneficial, especially chloride is mobile. So that means the more it rains, the more chloride we lose through the soil system. So we need more chloride. You're going to find anybody that's got grass on a sandy soil, if you're not putting on potassium and you have a deep sand, you should probably be looking at it because you're probably short on K and KCl, because potassium will leach in a sandy soil and so will your chloride. So our biggest response are some of those sandy soils, especially sandy soils we find along the rivers. So this is the one I like. So I don't think I've got any of my friends or kin on here, but I know enough people in eastern Oklahoma, from the far southeast to the far northeast. This comes across pretty, I'd hate to tell you, but I know a lot of folks, and they might even be related to me, that think there's no value in fertilizer whatsoever, even in improved Bermuda grass pasture, that it's just not going to do any good. And I get that, you've got to look at it. So I do think if you're concerned about nutrients, there's some very simple things you can do that are even easier than soil testing to find out if it's going to be of value for you to do or not. I can't see your faces, but show of hands, who's ever seen a pasture or anything that looks about like this? Justin, I can at least see Justin. He's shaking his head. He's got his hand up. Guess what, folks? I don't care what forage it is. If you fertilize that field, you will make money off of the fertilizer. That is a nutrient deficient field. And in this one, it's nitrogen deficiency. So if you have cowpox, especially in urine. So a lot of people think that you only find cowpox is this. It's an epidemic across the state of Oklahoma. It's sweeping the plains. A lot of people think it's the manure that you see that in, and more often than not, you actually see it in the urine patches, because urine, it has urea, and which is a nitrogen form. And so a lot of the times you'll see urine patches green up, and that's an immediate no, yes, that I need nitrogen. So guess what? If you've got cowpox in your pastures, fertilizing it's worth it. You don't even have to have a soil sample. Go put out a little nitrogen, and you'll make your money back, guaranteed. But if you want more than that, if you're not even sure, so I've always said this: why not let the crop tell you? We do this in wheat, but I've also done it in LaFleur County on some Bermuda grass pastures with nitrogen, to prove to in-laws that Bermuda grass will respond to nitrogen when it hasn't been fertilized in 30 years. And guess what? It does. It sure does when it hasn't had that. But it's a strip. So put a strip out in your field. And how do we do that? Well, with nitrogen, we have a lot of liquid systems. I don't think y'all should go this far. In fact, the one thing that I would say is a push spreader. And if you want one in a county office, I'll buy and send any county office in Oklahoma a push spreader, and so that you can buy a bag of fertilizer and take it out. And the cool thing is, if the fertilizer comes in dry form, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, you can put a strip out there all day long and see and just watch it. Put it outside your back door, so you look out in the morning when you're drinking your coffee, and if it shows up, call the co-op and get some fertilizer. It's as pretty simple as that, to see that it's a response there, and your field needs it. If you've been to Stillwater, you've probably seen or owned one of these cups. This was my winter cover on a garden I did one year. That's canola and wheat, and I used enriched strips with the Joe's cup. So it's really something that you can be done. Just take a cup out there and spread it in a circle and just look for it, right? It doesn't have to be big. As long as you know where it's at, you can find it later. It's really helpful. I think it's really beneficial to prove to you, or to prove to somebody, maybe there's somebody in your family you think should probably be fertilizing and they just don't want to, make them look at it every morning when they drink coffee. Go put a little strip out in their field. I want to bring this up, a little specifics about tall fescue. I had to bring it up because of what it is. So tall fescue, that's fescue is one of our cool seasons that predominates eastern Oklahoma, quite a bit of it. I've always I've used this slide before, and I think it holds well. So, Tall fescue grows well in clay soils, which with some water holding capacity, which explains a lot of eastern Oklahoma. Produces on soils that are too wet for most other forage grasses, which explains at least a lot of the ground in southeast Oklahoma the last couple of years have just been swamps. Doesn't do sites well on prone or deep sands. This is interesting. I bring this up. Many established stands that originated from Kentucky 31 tall fescue have persisted under low fertility, low pH, and overgrazing. Grazed hard and put up wet, basically tore it up, and you'll still find it there still going. Somehow it's still going. Well, the somehow is that the persistence is because it has a fungus inside of it, that endophyte. Now, if you're cattlemen and if you've gone through master cattlemen's, I know you've heard of the endophyte issues. That's why Kentucky 31 is so good, is because it has that endophyte. That's how it can persist, and that's how it can hang on so well. And so it's just something we have to be knowledgeable of, know what's going on. And while there's a lot of things you can do to manage it, when you're managing there's a whole lot of stuff you can do as far as herd management that I don't want to get into because I'm a soil fertility specialist. The toxins are really focused in the seed, so manage that. Keep the grazing on or hay it before it goes to seed. But one thing that has been shown is over fertilization with nitrogen will increase that toxicity. Now, I don't see much of our pasture country over fertilizing with nitrogen. In fact, most times I see it under, except in one scenario. That's where we've got a lot of litter applications. There's some ground that's been a little bit excessive in litter and get a little bit too hot. And so that's the one scenario you got to pay attention to, is if you know you've been hitting a lot of nitrogen, a lot of litter, and you've got fescue, make sure that you know what's out there. The one way you can go around it, Chisholm for the counties, yep. One way you can go around it is that, or not go around it, sorry, that is complementary forages that, sowing in, getting some warm season annuals in there like crabgrass. Red River would be one of those options, or clovers to increase forage quality. So basically interseeding, whether it's interseeding legumes, interseeding something like a crabgrass in there, helps kind of improves animal performance and reduce some of that toxicity. But again, I'm not a cattleman, I'm not a livestock specialist, so I'll leave it up to basically every educator on here knows more about this than I do. And so I'll leave it at that one. I'm going to go, and so Justin, this is a weird jump, but I want to get into acid soils, and I just put this in, I don't know, about 5:15 today, and then McDaniel asked me about lime and pale lime, so I think it fits perfect. I get a lot of questions, especially from eastern Oklahoma, about pale lime and liquid calcium, and so I want to spend a few moments about that. And then I'll actually answer the Red River or the crabgrass stuff. So what is acid soils? Acid soils are basically when we don't have base cations. Base cations are calcium, potassium, magnesium. Hydrogen is our acidic cation. So cation is a positive charged molecule, and an anion is negative. So a good pH is going to have a lot of calcium, magnesium, potassium. A low pH is going to be dominated by hydrogen. pH is actually a value of the hydrogen concentration. It's negative log of the hydrogen concentration. So it's all about the hydrogen in the soil. That's what the soil acidity is. And so we get soil acidity by losing or removing these base cations. So if this is a soil particle right here, this is our cations in the soil solution. When we either hay, graze, or leach, we pull calcium out of the soil solution. So that plant that you're haying, that fescue, Bermuda grass, crabgrass that you hay, pulls calcium out and puts it into its system. It's got calcium in it. Well, the system wants to be in its happy place. It has a happy place where it has an equal ratio of calcium in the soil solution that is on the soil particle. So to stay in the happy place, when you lose a calcium, you got to pull one off of the soil particle to keep the ratio good. Well, at some point you keep doing this and the cations keep being pulled off the soil particle because you're harvesting them or leaching them. And then they keep disappearing because you keep hauling them off. And folks, removing cations from a field is a good thing, because removing cations means you're removing forage or protein. That means you're removing livestock or forage because you're trying to make money on it. So the loss of cations is the natural process of agriculture. But what happens is we have all this coming and we get to a point where we start pulling all these and then they start getting substituted with hydrogen. Now, hydrogen gets in the system, it starts overwhelming the soil particle, and these keep going. And now everything's there. You start loosening up 3 plus, and this is the acidic aluminum 3 plus is the aluminum that is toxic to plants. It now becomes plant available, and we start having problems. How do we fix it? We fix it by getting rid of the hydrogen. That's how you fix soil acidity, is by removing hydrogen from the soil system. How do we do that? The number one way is the use of calcium carbonate or magnesium carbonate, which is called ag lime. It's also Pell lime. Pell lime is calcium carbonate and magnesium carbonate, just finely ground. So it works by putting calcium carbonate into the soil. It's a two-part process. If you only put calcium in the soil or only put carbonate in the soil, you only get half of the process done. You have to have a cation, you have to have carbonate. The cation, what happens is calcium carbonate drops in the soil, it breaks apart, and the calcium overwhelms and kicks the hydrogen off of this soil particle and moves it into the soil solution. Once in the soil solution, the hydrogen, the H, reacts with this carbonate, the CO3, to make water and carbon dioxide. So it basically removes the hydrogen from the system, adds calcium to the system, and increases your pH. Your resulting is higher pH, more calcium on the soil particle, water, and carbon dioxide. So, but you have to have the calcium and you have to have the carbonate. If you put gyp in, so gypsum is calcium sulfate. The calcium will break apart and kick the hydrogen off the soil particle, but the sulfate won't react with it, so the pH never changes. So that's why not all calcium forms does good for your soil particle. Now, if we look at this, and this is where we start getting the process, we make a soil test where we measure how much lime it takes. We actually put a lime substance into the water that has the soil and find out how it impacts the soil. And those recommendations are in tons per acre, thousands of pounds of calcium carbonate per acre. It's thousands of pounds of calcium carbonate because we're really looking at a system that has 2 million pounds of soil. And so we have to satisfy a bunch of hydrogen. And to satisfy a bunch of hydrogen, it takes a bunch of carbonate, calcium carbonate. And so Justin asked about ag lime versus Pell lime. Justin, Pell lime works just as good as ag lime if you put on tons per acre. You cannot do 10 pounds, 100 pounds. If you do 100 pounds per acre, that will work if you do it every single year for about 20 to 50 years. It has to be a continuum. You have to add it up. If the soil test needs 2,000 pounds, it's going to take 2,000 pounds to satisfy the hydrogen. 100 pounds a year, 200 pounds a year won't do it until you add 2,000 over a period of time. And it's a slow change at that point because you're offsetting with removal of the crop. So Pell lime, we've done a lot of Pell lime work. If I apply 2 tons of Pell lime per acre, it works just as good as 2 tons of ag lime. Humic acid. I've done a lot of humic acid in pH work, and humic acid is a great thing. So humic acid helps chelate nutrients. Not on the acidic side. Humic acid would help chelate and wrap around phosphorus. All the humic acid work that I've done has found, and I did this actually as a master's student, where I didn't get a response to humic acid until I hit 50 to 100 pounds of humic acid per acre. Unfortunately, a lot of the humic acid stuff that we have right now doesn't have enough. It's like Pell lime. Putting out a pint, putting out a quart, putting out 10 pounds or 5 pounds of humic acid is like putting out 10 pounds or 100 pounds of Pell lime when we need 2,000. Humic acid we need in the terms of about 50 to 100 pounds. Callan, that's a good question on liquid lime. Now my question to you, it's going to go to my next slide. Are you saying liquid lime or liquid calcium? Because they're two completely different products. True liquid lime is very finely ground calcium carbonate that comes from the fines from a quarry that they put with water. You typically find a 50% water, 50% ground carbonate, and you still have to put on 1,000, 2,000 pounds of dry product. So you're putting on approximately, let's say our CEC calls for 1,000 pounds of lime. You need 2,000 pounds. That would be 1,000 pounds of water and 1,000 pounds of lime because it's 50% slurry. A very popular product that I have done a bunch of testing with, and we can do more. Oh, let me show you. This is that equation. Effective because we have, oh, that was one I didn't mean into there. This is a study that's 3 years old. It looks at liquid calcium, hydrated lime, ag lime, all kinds of good stuff. And so here's the deal: is that there's a product out there called liquid calcium. Now, liquid calcium most of the time is a calcium chloride. So that's a problem with it, is it adds a calcium, but the chloride does nothing for you for getting rid of the hydrogen. Another challenge is that liquid calcium is typically applied anywhere between 2 and 5 gallons per acre. At those rates, we're applying about 3 pounds of calcium when we really need about, I just did this in my head not too long ago. We need anywhere between 500 and 2,000 pounds of the actual calcium ion in the soil solution. So what we typically see when I see a good response from the liquid calcium is a chloride response. So liquid calcium has that chloride, and I've got a ton of really good response from liquid calcium because of the chloride. So what I'll do is I'll put on liquid calcium, which is calcium chloride. I'll put on a calcium at the same level, and then I'll put on a chloride that doesn't have calcium at the same level. And every time the liquid calcium works, so does the chloride by itself work. So what we're doing is getting a chloride boost, which we can get from potassium chloride, which is going to be cheaper, and we can get more of it than we need. So it goes back to, we should just use 0060 or 0062 potassium chloride, and it serves us for that chloride aspect. All those are great questions. Justin, educators on here, I want to guess you get those questions on a regular basis. I know I do. This is one of those projects that I'd be happy to help demonstrate in any county on any crop. I do want to point out though, so on the stuff we did, this was in a Bermuda grass field. This was the soil pH after year 1. So the check, untreated check, and this is just right here. The field had a variance of about 4.5 to 5. And so no matter what we did, the Pell lime, we put the Pell lime on in the summer of the summer being like early June of 19. And so the lime changed it, but everything else, Pell lime applied in the summer, none of it changed the soil pH. Now in this Bermuda grass field, it also didn't change the yield. I'm not getting any yield boost from this Bermuda grass field. So we've got to figure out what's going on there. We're going into season 3 on this trial though. We won't do anything to these 2 plots, but we'll keep adding the 3rd year Pell lime. We'll add the 3rd year of these 2 different liquid calcium products, and we'll add the 3rd year of the equivalent calcium. So we'll add 3 pounds of calcium to the system to make sure it works. And so we've got that going on. This will be our 3rd year at 3 different locations in Stillwater. And it's a really neat study. Again, really low pH. So mid 4, honestly, am a little bit shocked that we're not seeing any response to the crop at this level. We're still putting about, what did we get? About 6 ton of production last year, no matter what the treatment was. So even if I say lime, it didn't. Now, one thing, and I'll just say this, if you're using herbicides, lime does matter. Herbicides often react differently if it's a herbicide with residual. pH does impact that, so keep that in mind. I'll enter the crabgrass. So the crabgrass is something we've been actually working with for the last 5 or 6 years in Stillwater. Great forage quality. There's actually some new lines. If you go to Western Oklahoma, it's really common to do a wheat. It's a graze out wheat, fertilize the crabgrass and go back into wheat. So it's almost constantly grazing. You just pull off the wheat, pull the cattle off the wheat long enough to get the flesh of crabgrass and fertilize it. It reseeds itself. It's a really cheap crop. And honestly, the forage quality is really good. I know Dr. Roccatelli has some forage quality off the crabgrass. So I've been a big fan. And for me, it's a cheap seeded crop, especially once you get going. It seems like you can't get rid of it very easily. And I've got one last little thing I'll talk about, just share with y'all, make it real quick. I'm a soil scientist by training, so I love looking at web soil surveys. If you just Google web soil survey, NRCS has a really cool app. It's called the Web Soil Survey. You hit the start button and you can zoom down to any field. Now, this is a pretty intense program. And so it's a little bit GIS, but if you ever want to know, I could walk you through it, but you can go in there and you can find out your soil series and find a whole lot about it. There's also an app, but I would guess half of you on here have used Google Earth. So I'm a huge fan of Google Earth. This is Google Earth Pro, which I don't believe I purchased. I think you just downloaded it. It's on. And I downloaded the Soil Survey Series map. And so you can actually toggle this on and off. And it's the same thing, just using Google Earth. And so I go in here. So this is, I grew up in Wyandotte, Northeast. And so, Angie, I'll touch that good one. Grow up in Northeast Oklahoma, which has got a lot of sage. This is Wyandotte, looking at the fields in Wyandotte. And so I can go on here and look at one of my buddy's pastures and find out that this bottom ground good drained. If he wants to invest in it, he should. This hillside, which I knew it was junk. Oh, let me go back. This hillside was junk, but it tells me how junk it is without even having to go there. So when my buddy calls me about sage grass, I ask him exactly what field is he on. And so I can look at the parameters and see where it is. Sage often comes with fertility management, is that the sage often performs extremely well when our other grasses cannot, because of either pH or low phosphorus or low nitrogen. So often, not always, often though, we can manage out of sage with some good fertility management. Go take a soil sample, look at your soil pH and phosphorus specifically. And I would be first looking at phosphorus on there and seeing if that's something. But that would be one of the first go-tos when it comes to sage control. It is letting the forages you want outcompete the sage with better fertility. And I'm going here, and this is my on-farm testing. So this goes back to my strips. These are different ways I go, and I'm going to guess there's more than one deer hunter on here. This little critter right here is a half-ton spreader. They sell it as a food plot spreader. It's great for check strips too. So it's a multi-purpose tool. I can pull it behind with an ATV, and I can cover ground with food plots, or I can put out reference strips or check strips. And so, you know, the recommendations we have for Oklahoma are built across the entire state. And our state goes from LaFleur County, we're in Red Slough, where the gators have their noses through the ice today, up to Boise City and the Black Mesa over 14,000 feet or whatever. And so we have one recommendation. If you really want to know what's going to work on your piece of ground, go out there with the Joe's Cupper or a spreader and spread a little phosphorus, spread a little potassium, put a little bit of liquid calcium or liquid lime on and see what happens. Do check strips, be your own researcher and your own scientist in your own backyard. Educators and myself are happy to help you out on anything you want to do as far as just looking at those things, giving you our background and our knowledge of them. But man, we got a great opportunity to just do backyard tests all day long and just see. I think I answered the questions in there. There's all my contact information. I'm hitting the time frame I was shooting for, Justin. I wanted to be done about 1:45. Are there any questions I didn't answer?
Dr. Arnell, maybe is there a bare minimum if you get your soil test report back on cool seasons to that 60 pound is what you kind of presented tonight? But is that kind of what you're telling people, is a bare minimum to make it worthwhile?
Yeah, to me, Brian, because I look at it as you got fertilizer cost and you have applicator cost, and whether that's time or you, I would say that 60, that I would, if I'm only wanting half a ton of increased production, it doesn't seem like the option on that. So I would go with 60 as a minimum, just for the application cost. You guys have great questions. This has been fun.
This has been a good meeting. Lots of interaction, and that's good. Any final questions for Dr. Arnall? So March the 18th will be Dr. Alex Rocatelli, and he will be discussing warm season forage management. So we'll probably get into some of the more into like the crabgrass and the Bermuda grass and things like that we kind of hit on tonight, but spend a little more time with those. Then we'll also, Casey Russell with Cole County Extension will be on, and he will go over some forage testing techniques. And so discuss the benefits of forage testing. And so that'll be March the 18th. And that'll be here. We will send you out a new link. We will use a new link just to kind of mix it up so that we don't have people coming into our meeting that we didn't invite. So be watching your email. We'll send you one out a few days ahead of time, and then maybe one the day of as a reminder. But if you're not seeing something, let us know, and we will make sure we get the emails to you, because I sent out lots of emails today, and I had guys calling saying they weren't getting them, but I wasn't seeing a return. So we know that sometimes these emails get lost out there somewhere. And so if you're not seeing something from us, let us know, and we will make sure to make contact with you. We'll mark your calendars for March the 18th. And then if you want to plan ahead a little bit, it's pretty well the third Thursday of every month at 6 o'clock. And so if you want to kind of put it on your calendar, those will be the dates. But third Thursday of every month, we will have to figure out what we're going to do for October. We haven't done that, but we will have something for you. So if there's nothing else, you guys stay safe, and we appreciate what you're doing. We appreciate you being with us this evening. And if there's any way we can help you, feel more than welcome to call us or email us and let us know how we can help you. And we'll be glad to do that. There's lots of other extension educators on here tonight, and I appreciate them helping with this. And this is definitely a group effort that couldn't do this by this is not a one pony show. And so we appreciate everybody being a part of this. And I know I've seen Brian and Brad and Coy and Carla for sure. And then it's good to see Clay Horton too from over at Ada NRCS. And so appreciate all you guys being on here and the work you're doing in your counties as well. And so, Dr. Arnold, thank you very much. And we appreciate you being with us this evening and sharing your information with us.
Had fun. Love these questions.